My name is Elżbieta Matynia. I'm a professor of sociology and liberal studies at the New School for Social Research and director of the Trans-Regional Center for Democratic Studies here. And wherever you are, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to a talk by a distinguished political thinker, Nadia Urbinati, whom many of us know from her presentations here at the New School and from her work as a co-editor of Constellations, a journal which is affiliated with the New School for Social Research. This is the second guest lecture in this year's Trans-Regional Dialogues, which is a fellowship program, the fellowship program that we have entitled Rethinking the Past, Reimagining the Future. Trans-Regional Dialogues is a non-residential project. Indeed, our fellows reside in Ukraine, some of them in Ireland, Brazil, and in New York. Non-residential, yet highly interactive and collaborative initiative that brings together 22 men and women, more specifically doctoral students in the social sciences, very broadly defined social sciences. About half of them are in a war-shattered Ukraine right now. The other half are international doctoral students from various parts of the world. As I said, most of them studying here at the New School. Those who want to know more about the program and what we are doing and lectures that are still coming can go to the website, and I think the link is or will be in a second on a chat. For us here at the New School, this is an important learning moment. And just as in the case of the Conversatorium on Ukraine that we've concluded in mid-September, and that Conversatorium could be seen on YouTube, we wanted to share this moment of learning with a wider public, hence the webinar, and not a Zoom format of some of our events. One of the Trans-Regional Dialogue Fellowship groups, working groups, and we have four such groups. This particular one is concerned with a worldwide erosion of democracy and striking emergence of new variants of democracy and hybrid regimes. So one of those working groups wanted to meet, to listen, and to talk with Professor Nadia Urbinati. Nadia Urbinati graciously agreed. And so today she is here with us, and her talk is entitled Transformations of Democracy. The full bio of Professor Urbinati is again online, and the link is on the chat. So let me introduce her only very briefly. But I wanted to say that she received her PhD from European University in Florence just at the time, that same year that the Berlin Wall went tumbling down in 1989. The event which encouraged the emergence of democratic aspirations everywhere. And I'm sure this only looks like a coincidence, but now Nadia Urbinati very quickly became known as an astute political theorist specializing in political theory, especially in democratic and non-democratic traditions of thought. She is Kyriakos Tsakopoulos Professor of Political Theory at Columbia University. Right now, she's actually in New York, teaching at Columbia, where she co-chaired the faculty seminar on political and social thought at some point. And as I already mentioned, she is co-editor with Andrew Arato of the New School of Constellations, an international journal of critical and democratic theory. She retains very strong academic links and affiliations with Italian academic institutions, while being a member of the executive committee of the Foundation Reset Dialogues on Civilization. You may know her 2012 book, which you've written with Stephen Lux on political writings of Condorcet, and perhaps more likely you read or you heard about her 2019 book, Me, the People, How Populism Transforms Democracy. After the talk, a small group of our fellows will be invited to talk with Professor Urbinati and I will introduce them then. In the meantime, I'm inviting Nadia Urbinati to the screen, and we will be hearing her speaking on transformations of democracy. Professor Urbinati.
Oh, thank you so much, Elisabetta, and also all of you. I feel a little bit actually moved this morning, because I know that this program is so deeply connected with the most dramatic moment we are having now in our continent and the globe, because the Ukrainian war of the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians is going to have and is having an impact all over the world for bad reasons, of course, economic and also political, in my view. So the presentation today has to do with the following problem. I will use the Italian case, particularly in relation to the last political elections of September the 25th. And I will start from there in order to propose a reflection upon what I consider to be a critical moment in transformation in our democracies for political and procedural as well as social reasons. I'm not a sociologist, not an economist, so all the hypotheses or proposals I will have on this part of my conversation or my lecture will be simply a kind of speculations more than theory. But well, let's try. And I'm going to start with by reading the outline that I propose to you, so that to make clear immediately the topic. So in the last, this is the outline, and then I go to the lecture. In the last elections in Italy, as I said, September the 25th, which were won by right-wing coalitions, center extreme right-wing, the party representing the center-left suffered a resounding defeat by what is traditionally considered a left-wing electorate: poor, unemployed, low-wage workers. These citizens largely did not vote, or if they did vote, they chose either the Five Stars movement or the post-fascist party, which then won the election. Starting with these elections, I would like to address the issue of the breakdown of representation in democracies, that is between elected representatives and the large part of the citizenry, which is also manifested through low turnout participation in election. Taking the Italian case as my point of departure, I would like to discuss the issue of the decline of a social democratic vision in contemporary democracy as the main reason for the success of the right wing. And thus, I think that populism is part of this phenomenon, yet even more so are the authoritarian tendencies within democracies whose party systems are in decay. So this is the frame of my lecture. Now, what's happened the 25th of September in the Italian elections? Now, first of all, the elections were based on a terrible electoral system. Terrible because this new system of election was introduced a few years ago, and it is organized so as that if parties don't make a coalitions, they cannot hope to win. And if they make a coalition, if their coalition reaches the point of 40%, it can have, or it has actually, a kind of gift in terms of an exceeding number of seats in parliament. So only the right-wing parties were smart enough to reach a coalition and to construct a coalition. The opposition parties, center or left or hyper-left, they marched individually, either because they didn't agree they are so serious that sometimes they cannot even make an agreement on a prudential reasoning, namely winning elections. So they were totally isolated. They went to election one by one, and they lost as a coalition. Although if you sum all the votes they received, they are even more than the votes that the center right got. But this number of votes, they mean nothing in relation to those who are going to rule the country or to have the majority. So having said so, I would like to say something concerning the winners and the losers of this election. The winner, we have to pay attention to the right wing in Europe, because in my view, the Italian case is a paradigmatic case that is going to have an impact in the European Union, in relation both to the presence of more authoritarian regimes, or if you want to say so, right-wing governments, and in relation to the difficult moment in which nationalism is growing in relevance in Europe. And Italy has a plan, or has a function in this, because the new majority wants precisely to stress the moment of sovereignism or nationalism, not only at the local level or national level, but also in Europe. So who are these right-wing parties? And I would like to say something about them, because they reflect a trend that is not simply and only in Italian. So we have to pay attention to when these right-wing movements developed. Now, they developed precisely after or during the decline of the Cold War first and the end of the Cold War. The growth of new right-wing parties in Europe, starting in France and then also, of course, in Italy, started in the 80s. That is, at the end of the great moment of social democratic expansion in the 70s, when things start changing, both at the international level with the many events like the Yom Kippur War, and the first moment in which the energetic problem became a problem in the West, particularly in Europe, and then also the Bretton Woods Accord stopped, and a new kind of globalization phenomenon started, not longer cooperative between the United States and its former allies of World War II, but in fact competitive. So the 80s thus are a turning point, first of all, in France, when, of course, François Mitterrand's Socialist Party claimed the first victory for the left since World War II. But meanwhile, the National Front by Jean-Marie Le Pen also became a relevant actor, and he shifted the strategy from traditional nationalism toward a more racialized ideologies and more exclusionary toward the newcomers or the immigrants. This was an important moment. And in Italy, in the 80s, like in Austria, like in Belgium, had new populist parties, all of them with strong xenophobic and ethnocentric ideologies, and all of them critical of party democracy and an apparently consolidated European ethos, or of cosmopolitan openness and universal human rights. So nationalism as sovereignist against this cosmopolitan ideology or European Union ethos. So this new populism also made clear that opposition against the establishment did not need to translate into a full anti-parliamentary regime as in the past. All of them, they come from nostalgia toward past dictatorial fascism, but they don't need now to go so far in order to make their own position nationalistic or right-wing. So anti-establishment strategies could be framed as political projects capable of achieving consent through propaganda and elections in view of changing democracy by bringing it back to its national, in the sense of national popular roots. So by the end of the first millennium, Jörg Haider in Austria had finished second in the Austrian parliamentary elections, which led to a right-wing governing coalition for the first time, unified by an aggressive propaganda against cosmopolitan Europe and immigrants. So here we are within this trend, which had an important moment in Brexit, which had important moment in Italy with the new movements and parties formations. I mentioned at least one, and it's the beginning of a long series, in Italy at least, of transformation, of populistic transformations of political party. So in Italy, precisely, Umberto Bossi, the chair of the Lega Nord, was already a member of the right-wing coalition government led by the populist tycoon Silvio Berlusconi at the beginning of the 90s, was the Lega Nord mobilized in the industrial north regions of Italy with a program of separation and split federalization of Italy in the name of emancipating the well-being parts of the country against or from the responsibility toward the other parts of the country, less fortunate or less developed, in order to break, as they used to say, any forms of responsibility toward the worse off. So this kind of national selfishness of part of the regions against the nation states was very strange, because how can you justify this in the name of nationalism? Yes, it was possible to justify it in the name of nationalism, because from that moment on, the idea of nationalistic movements took also the form of a evaluation of the parts of the nation as superior in relation to the other one, thus giving the one part of the nation, the superior one, the leadership of the entire nation. Thus today, the Lega Nord, still in the north based, has or claims to have prerogative of leadership of the entire nation in the name of being a representative of the most advanced part of the country. So this is a kind of nationalism of discrimination, not nationalism of like at the 19th century, kind of nationalism unifying all people inside of the motherhood of the mother nations. So here we are. So we are in this moment in which the Cold War is over, and along with the Cold War are also over the main protagonists that accompany the reorganization and refounding of democracies in Europe, and in this case in Italy. I refer to the socialist parties, social democratic parties, reformist parties. So along with the right wing, thus, victory of the right wing in Italy a few weeks ago, another phenomenon occurred, which is even more striking, not only the defeat of the left, but the inability of the center left to attract the votes from those who generally used to vote for it. So this is a new phenomenon. It's not a new phenomenon because the right wing was able to conquer the majority regardless of the past legacy with fascism, which was considered to be irrelevant, is still considered to be irrelevant. But also the real issue here is the incapability of the existing party of the center left to attract the natural, or what should be the natural electorate for it, that is low salary earns people, unemployed people, or generally speaking, the people without pretensions of a higher middle class, or even sometimes middle class status. So how is possible that half of the citizenry doesn't show up in election? Our democracies, in this case Italy, but this is also true for other countries, is a democracy in which the large part of portions of the citizens, they don't go to vote. And they're not going to vote, which cannot be analyzed because is an individual choice. We can simply make an hypothesis, make a guess that the reason why they don't go to vote is not simply because they are indifferent, but many times also because they don't think that their interest, their worry, their stressful situation is represented. So the question is precisely to do with the satisfaction with the representation, or as Bob Dahl used to call it, with the intensity of adhesion of people to the representative system and thus their parties on the one hand, and on the other hand, of a fantastic attraction that the right wing is having on the less fortunate part of our citizenry. This is also new recently. It was not new in the past, because also the fascist regimes, when they started at the beginning of the 20th century, they attracted the interest of the worse off people who came from World War I back and didn't find jobs, didn't find settle their own position, and they didn't find in the existing socialist parties those days answers that were for them sufficiently clear and convincing. So they vote for this new regime or new party, which was called in Italy the fascist party. Now here we are. So my problem to you is the following. First, to make a claim that the growth of political forms of populism is connected to, at least in consolidated democracies, is connected to the decline of party organizations, which was able until now, until the beginning of the decline, to organize and to guide and to lead and to inform and to motivate the electorate. So the decline of organized parties and the formation of what Bernard Manin has called in his book on the principles of representative government, the growth of an audience democracy. That is a democracy that is no longer structured according to parties, but according to media or diffusion of informations from different sources in the domain of opinion formations, without any reference point that is political or expressively partitical or party-based, but simply information coming from a plurality of sources with no center of gravitation toward politics or toward parties. So this opinion, broadly speaking, audience-based opinion, is the easiness for populism to grow, because populism has the characteristic, wherever you go you can see it, to create a kind of unification of different claims that are scattered and distributed in and diffused in societies without any political organization organizing or uniting them. So scattered claims that are capable of being unified under a shrewd and functionally good narrative, impersonated or personified by a leader. So in a horizontal democracy of the public or democracy of the audience, the kind of political representation that is going to have great success is precisely a representation which I call embodiment. Embodiment in the leader, embodiment in one narrative of different parts of societies, so that they are, or they feel to be, mirrored in the words and in the proposal of the leader. So this new form of representation of embodiment is capable today of replacing the other one, the one based on organized parties. And Italy is an interesting case of this transformation, because indeed the populist phenomenon were several in Italy, and they started in the 90s, when They started when, for reasons of corruption or a huge scheme of corruption that the judges brought to tribunals and thus destroy, and this, of course, implied that in 2 years, the entire political system, the entire party system was dissolved suddenly. Only one party resisted, the former Communist Party, which then changes names and is today at the origin of the many transformations that brought about different names and labels, occupied the central left. But in any case, in 92, because of that so-called tangentopoly, that is bribes will, the entire system of parties disappeared. And in that emptiness of organized parties, the democracy of the public, the democracy of the audience that I mentioned before, was the only way of amalgamate, unify the political proposals for elections. And this is where populism starts to be developed. And in Italy, as recently Alex Stille wrote in the Dissent, in Italy is an interesting case study because the dismantling of organized parties produce one after the other one, populist movement and populist leaders. We have a kind of production and consumptions of populist leaders. We can count 6 until now, from Berlusconi to Bossi to Renzi to Salvini and now to Meloni, one after the other one. So it is as if the democracy of the audience is producing, like in a market of ideas, they're not ideas, market of proposals, like in a market, they propose themselves in a very shrewd and smart system of commercialization of their own candidacy. These leaders propose themselves like marketable products, and the elections become really a picking up of what they like, of what people like, regardless of any forms of identification of ideology or interest or even conveniences. So that is the reason why many of the people who traditionally used to vote for the center-left parties today vote for what is more or better commercialized. Could be a leader like the Lega Nord, like Salvini, or even a leader of a Democratic Party, as it happened years ago, and now finally a leader of the right wing. So these transformations of democracy from party democracy to audience democracy, which translates into in the populist democracy, is accompanied by, and perhaps I'm not a political scientist to the point of being able to define the causality here, but we can guess in some sense. In any case, to generalize, these phenomena are also connected with an important issue, the disappearance of a party or a proposal, of party proposals concerning a social distribution of costs and benefits, and thus a social distribution of wealth for those people who, because of the economic crisis of 2008 or previous crisis, are systematically behind and systematically forgotten by the mainstream politics. So part of the population don't have representation. They look for representation wherever they find these publicized, well-publicized leaders. And in my view, the election of Italy of September the 25th is a fantastic, although tragic example of a part of the citizenry, economically speaking, those who should be connected to the left, naturally, the social democratic, for instance, they don't find it and they go elsewhere. So Habermas, a few years ago, wrote in the Frankfurt Allgemeine Gazette that one of the reasons why this populist propaganda is so successful, it is also because the social democratic proposals is in dismay, doesn't have anymore a link to large to society at large, and doesn't have a soundable proposal. This is the case in Italy for sure, but not only in Italy. We saw the recent elections in Sweden and other elections elsewhere in Europe, not to mention the leaders or the country leaders of this transformation toward authoritarian populism, which is Hungary, and not only. So this is a broader phenomenon, and I use Italy simply as a case without having any ambition to make it into a role model for interpretation of other phenomena. Now, what is the phenomenon that? Is a phenomenon that tells us a few things. First of all, the democracy is not simply electoral democracy, as minimalist theorists tell us. The democracy in a representative system is a complex and thick system of procedures, institutions, and political, informal political activities from civil society with groups, movements, and opinion-making formation, all together, along with the electoral system, along with the institutions of the states, and along with the parties, all together, they make for what we call representative democracy. So if this comprehensive, holistic system, it is an holistic system, representative democracy, that includes movements inside as a way of pushing, controlling, monitoring, and inputting something new inside of the system, and the system not only answering, but changing itself from inside in order to enter in a positive and dynamic relation with civil society. I call it as an holistic system. Now, if in this holistic system, one part is radically changed or in dismay, as it is the organized political parties, then the entire system receives a reaction back and changes in some important way. Although the regime remains the same, although the representative or the constitutional democracy is still in place, well, until now, with this change in the long run, if this change is going to become stable in the long run, I guess that we will have to face also changes in the way in which constitutional democracy is today, meaning a constitutional democracy based on a plurality of parties and the conception of election as a way of counting votes, but also combining or making possible the contrast of the competition of different parties and different views, thus diminishing the value and the place of pluralism. This is what we see today, and giving more place, more room, more expression to the moment of executive or verticality of the nation interest one, as the right-wing populist wants to do. So I think that there is a trend toward this transformation. And in Europe, and I like to come to this issue at the end, in Europe, this is perhaps connected to a transformation of the very community called European Union, which if countries like Italy was one of the founders and is the first one that one of the founder countries of the European Union is taking officially a position. We are going to see the government in action in a few days. Is taking a position that is critical of the spirit and the many institutions also of the European Union as it is today. Critic in relation to what? Critic of the interference that the courts of rights, the system of rights and the regulation system, the interference of this European system in the decisions and the policies of each national governments. This is a claim that Meloni, the leader of the new majority, made immediately. We have to revise and to review the way, revise the way in which Europe works, because we cannot accept anymore interference concerning choices and political choices we make at the national level. This is one important argument in the name of sovereignism versus a conception of Europe that is cooperative, or if you want to say community-based. The other impact is going to have, very important in my view, is on rights. Rights and those rights that have been in the last years identified with the condition of discriminated against minorities of any kind, not only for a more moral or subjective reason of sexual choices and different forms of marriage, thus institutionalization of a variety of forms of marriages or unions or connections or partnership, but also minorities discriminated against in the name of their religion and in the name of their language, and thus in the name of their national ethnical identification. And since our countries are becoming more and more multiracial or multiracial, countries, this may have a very unpleasant, to say the least, effect in the way of using the law, using the state of rights or the institutions in order to not be inclusive or fair or just, but to be instead the expression of the identity and the will of the majority, the identity and the will of the national majority in this case. So we have to be ready to and to be prepared to see this criticism of the universalism of rights and the universalism of inclusions in terms of institutional inclusion, of course. And we are facing already with populism a phenomenon that is, in Italy at least, we saw it, or we started seeing from the time of the late 90s with Berlusconi, a phenomenon in which the majority consider itself to be the good one, and thus to have the license almost of using the institutions, possessing the institutions, as if the institutions were the expression of the good majority or the good people, as Trump used to say here in the States when he was a president. So the sense that the Constitution needs to be made, the Constitution of the majority needs to be the expression of the constitutions of the good part of the people, which is the majority part of the people. This is a frightening transformation of democracy from the rule of law or constitutional democracy to a propriety or property conception of democracy, in which the property or the owner is, in this case, the right people or the majority. So this is what populism does in many countries in which populism is in power, and what this can be in a consolidated democracy. It can be also in a consolidated democracy, not simply in democracies that are still in the making, as it was for the past. In the past, in the 60s and the 50s, populism was an expression of constructions of the people unity in countries that were marching or going toward democracy. Now, today, we see this phenomenon of appropriation of the institutions by majority in countries that have consolidated constitutional and representative democracy, and this is something new. And in my view, one of the reasons why this representative democracy based on the Constitution is into stress today, it is because also of the transformations of one of the main important, most important intermediate institutions that are crucial for representative democracy, which are political parties. So the transformation of parties is also the transformation of the way in which democracy operates. So Charles Mayer wrote in his last excellent book on Ruling the Void, that a transformation of parties from organized parties to parties simply as labels for launching a leader or being capable of selecting or electing public officers inside of the states, and it is institutionalizing parties instead of being organizing parties in civil society. He said so several years ago. This will be primed to change the way in which our representative democracy are and create a condition for populism. So I think that's to come to an end, that these last elections in Italy can be used as a sample of a change or a transformation that is in the making in our Western constitutional democracies. I think I'm stopping here. Thank you so much for your patient attendance, of course, your patience.
Technology. Thank you very much, Nadia. I disappear, and now it was very easy to, not very easy to reconnect. Thank you so much. Thank you for your very sharply constructed argument and a very illuminating one. So what I would like to do right now is to invite to the webinar 4 of our fellows, and I'm going to invite them alphabetically. I'm going to introduce them alphabetically. The first one, so I want you to know who is going to talk to you and who is going to ask you questions on behalf of all of us. And I will look at the chat, and we'll have time. We'll bring the questions from the chat as well. So the first one is Adam Kohler-Brown. Brown is B, and he is a doctoral student from the sociology department here at the New School for Social Research, who is interested in the phenomenon of crowds, the meaning of the crowd in today's politics. The second one is Udipta Chakravarti, also from sociology. We've been we just brought people from that particular working group, which is working on the variants of democracy, and it seemed to me that those are people who are mostly based here at the New School. So Udipta Chakravarti is also a candidate, doctoral candidate from the sociology department here at the New School for Social Research, who is directly interested in the question of populism. That's why we are having him here today. The project he's right now working on is entitled The Populist Boomerang, from the post-colony to the West. Susanna Garibai, another student from the New School and from the politics department, is interested in anti-colonial idea of nation in Latin America. You did refer to the question of nation and how that is actually changing, and that had been transformed in the course of the last almost two centuries. So Susanna and Katharina Kurz, who is actually Austrian, but she studies in Ireland at the Department of Anthropology and Education at Maynooth University in Ireland. And she had a project here this semester. In each case, it is related to the PG projects, obviously, but this semester is entitled Listening for and Listening to Solidarity, Reimagining Democratic University Education in a Hybrid World. So here they are. And I will just invite them as alphabetically as I mentioned them to turn to you and to bother you and to make you more tired than you already are. So Adam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Elżbieta. And thank you, Professor Urbinati, for this wonderful presentation. I have 2 questions. First, in your discussion of the relationship between populist leaders and their followers, you specifically used this concept of embodiment. And I was hoping you could speak to this a bit more. What does embodiment look like for leaderless movements or for populist movements before they enter the regime stage? And how does this change when we think about populist parliamentary representatives? And then my second question refers to your discussion of commercialization and the shift to audience democracy. How does this commercialization work? You at one point termed this propaganda. Does this specifically work through media relationships? And how do media staffers affect this? I'm thinking here of public relationship experts, speechwriters, people that control and strategize the aesthetic relationship between populists and their followers. And does this offer a potential pathway to the reconstruction of this community of the European Union? Or do you see this commercialization and turn towards propaganda as exclusively a right-wing phenomenon that doesn't have any potential for rebuilding a left community? Thank you.
Okay, good. Meanwhile, I send you, I hope they was able to do it, an attachment through the chat. Did you get it?
We are checking.
I don't think it made it through.
No?
I think there is a very long.
Yeah,
No.
No,
No, this is not it.
click here to enter, this one. Populist past and present. Did you have it?
We don't have it, and if this is not very
Anyway,
convenient right now, but perhaps we can
I will.
ask you to send
I
it to
would
us
like
as
to
an email.
send it to you, to all of you. It's a paper that is going to be a chapter in a book that has to do with the transformations of the meaning and the interpretations of populism. Not only the meaning, the interpretations, that is how the scholars start to understand populism, beginning with after World War II to now. So, and since you work particularly, I think, Udetta, you work on this boomerang. So that is populism starting from the so-called margins of the West and coming back in the center, transforming both the West and the center, both the center and the periphery on the same times. And this is very, very, I found it very interesting. Anyway, if you want, I can send it to you because I was unable to do it by myself now. Coming to the question of Adam concerning embodiment. Now you work on crowd, so we can understand each other very well here. The embodiment is a conception and a practice of representation that comes traditionally from within the church. Is the Pope embodying the global church of the believers.
Mm-hmm.
They recognize themselves as one church, as one people in the faith and the doctrine of the one. It can also have no doctrine, it's simply its own presence. So in this case, representation's function is not that of making decisions, but is that of making a statement of unity and of existence. So we are one with you, thanks to you, under you. There is no relationship of accountability. We cannot ask the leader to tell us why he does so or why he says so. And there is no relationship of interdependence, as in election. I vote for you, but you are also dependent on me, and you are. So it is instead the relationship of total faith, total adhesion. We are one, and we give ourselves to him. So if you transport this conceptualization in politics, you may have a political leader who is no longer so much political in the sense in which political representation has been constructed through competition, parties, monitoring, criticism, and so on and so forth. That is accountability in a very loose and complex sense, but is simply an affirmation of power and unity of a group of people declaring to be one in the name of the leader. So this kind of representation in politics is dangerous when it is operational inside of the lawmaking institution, that is in the parliament. Because if it is simply the representative of the country, no, the president is also the face giving unity to the people, but it's not, doesn't have a strong political function. But in the states in which the president has also is also part of the lawmaking function, if this conception is operational, becomes very problematic, because at this point, the face of the leader, the embodiment, becomes one thing with the people, so that what the leader does in the name of the people is what the people want, because the will of the people is the will of the leader, without any possibility of control. So this conception of representation, which is not only conception, is a practice, makes an important change that takes away from political or mandate or party representation its own peculiar democratic character. Democracy not because we create a unity, but democracy because we articulate that unity into different voices, which are not shut down, which are not inclusive, unified, but they remain in their own autonomy, and they have the power of criticizing, changing, controlling, opposing, demonstrating. So you can see how representation is a rich form of participation, not simply delegating somebody. So that for me is crucial. And then you ask me, well, propaganda, how you make a crowd into a people one? How you make this, ocean of undetermined people into a narrative that gives the people an identity. So this passage from the crowd to the people one, which is what the populist leader does, it's the phenomenon of populism, which is thus also a rhetorical phenomenon, a propaganda phenomenon, a construction through, as Laclau says, a construction through the narrative of something that was not there before. The people. The people is a total construction and creation. These people today is not the same people as the one yesterday. Leaving aside the people in the Constitution that remains the same, but is the use fictio iuris, is simply but the other people, the political people, changes along with its representation. So the people that the leader represents is the people that the leader constructs out of this constructivist rhetoric from the crowd, which is a kind of it's like a volcano, the crowd, it's a boiling many things inside without a logic, a unity, a narrative. And populism gives this unity. I don't know whether I answer you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, you did.
Okay. The next question comes from Udipta, and I only wanted to ask you, Nadia, if you could send us this text, to send it to Lala, and we will take care of it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. It would be easier. Udipta, you have a floor. You have to unmute. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Urbinati, for that very systematic presentation. I am somewhat sympathetic to Laclau, so I assume that there are going to be some disagreements. But yes, I have two questions seeking clarification, and then one more normative critical. So first, the issue of nationalism and the relationship between nationalism and populism.
Yeah.
I suspect in your argument, I don't know if you're talking about this with particular reference to Italy or a general kind of rethinking about nationalism in a populist moment. But I suspect historically too, that there's always a proverbial part-whole logic in any kind of nation building project, and a kind of Southern question that's implicit, that certain regions become dominant in terms of the symbols, cultural motifs that constitute the nation. So what is exactly the specificity? I just am unable to think about a nation without a kind of underlying populist logic. Second, this is, I know you said that you're not interested in the explicating the causalities, but I suspect it creates a problem for the normative argument. If audience democracy is a kind of sociological process, in that it is both shaping the movement towards party cartelization or party ossification, in the context of audience democracy, what would then be a different kind of party institution that's possible without precisely marketing, labeling, etc. So how do you build an alternative representative system if the transformation itself is sociological? And then to the normative, I hear you now almost with your emphasis on the decline of the left. At least your diagnosis is very similar to MOVE. And I wonder in what sense a new left, new social democratic imaginary would be different from a left populist one. And secondly, how that would be necessarily compatible with a vision of Europe, because you could have like a Wolfgang Streeck project where the left is also a kind of nationalist, social democratic left. So if you could address those questions.
So you have many questions. Can you repeat me the first one, because I forgot about too many.
The first one was about the part-whole relationship of nationalism.
Okay, no, look at, I come immediately to that. I didn't want to introduce this element as a category because this would require a different kind of lecture. I wanted simply to show how inside of this country, of Europe, the nationalistization of politics emerged along with the criticism of Brussels and the European Union. So the European Union, in the case of Brexit, is paradigmatic. The European Union was a way of reintroducing from another point of view, the terminology of nationalism. So after a few decades of inclusion in the community project, it was as if in the moment in which, for economic reasons, for bureaucratic reasons, you put all what you want to do, a new form of reaction against Europe took form in the by using the argument of nationalism. I also wanted to refer to this issue, not the question of the formation of the nation that takes us back to the 15th century. I don't want to do that because would be another story. But I understand your point, meaning the formation of the nation and the formation of the people are two different things. They are not the same. And second, the formation of the nation as the structural body of the sovereign with the nation states has also an element of sociology and juridical identification. It's not simply a formalistic process, particularly the nation. The people could be totally artificial, but the nation cannot be completely artificial. So we agree on that. We also agree on the fact that if you take a work which is for me paradigmatic on Latin America, that is oh my god, I wanted to be so quick and I forgot. Well, this scholar was the scholar of Ernesto Laclau. I will come to oh my god, Germani, bravo. So Germani was the one who really was capable of showing, we can disagree with him, how the formation of the nation produced in Latin America what we call populism, because it needed to be created out of a plurality of ethnicity to give a unity to them at the political level, since they couldn't not do it at the cultural or linguistic or religious level. So the project of creating the nation became a project of creating the people all together. And this was also a reason why populism became a project much broader than simply a project of majority formation or government formation. This is one question. The other question I don't remember. The second one.
Sorry, yeah. The second one was about whether or not the transformation to audience democracy in Manin is a sociological transformation. And
okay.
If it's a sociological transformation, how would you rethink the possibilities of recreating party institutions that goes back to the mass party or the even catch-all?
Excellent. So let me say that although I refer to Manin because he gives us some linguistic reference, I don't agree on Manen's in this sense that he proposes a stadial process from a time in which in the 19th century the party representation was ruled by notables, that is parties inside of the parliament, to a moment in which, thanks to also electoral suffrage, universal electoral suffrage, we have parties, 20th century, to a moment now in which parties are in decline and we have I think this reading, although elegant and also attractive, because it's stadial, like all the French, it's like Camps and Simon is stadial, one after the other one. This is problematic because historically, as also Kislansky and many political historians, they showed, when you have election, you form parties. So Kislansky wrote a book on the history of parliamentary system in England in the 17th century, showing that as soon as elections were instituted, the communities started to be, stopped to be a community of united people between the gentry and the gentry presenting themselves as giving the service to the public, you know. Instead, they had to compete to get the vote of their communities. And in the moment they did so, they started separating and creating ideological unities, that is parties. So you cannot have an electoral system or a representative government without parties. It's not that before there were no parties and then there were parties and then there are no longer parties. Parties are always there, although they are liberal and very few only in the parliament like in the 19th century. They can be mass parties as we had in Europe, and not only in Europe, also in Latin America for many decades. And also today we have parties. It's not the parties with the audience disappear. They play another role. They are no longer organized, as I try to say. That is dividing the people inside of civil society, not only inside of the majority. Organizing the people, their information, their interpretations, partisanship, right? But now they are simply agencies for selecting the political personnel. They are like machinery for electoral appointment. And in this way, they leave all the people outside by themselves without any affiliation. So it is what Charles Mayer called cartelization of parties. Parties as cartel, they not produce, but make possible the audience becoming an ocean of disintermediation. In this situation, you may have an easy formation of populism now. So it's not simply sociological. In my view, the reading of Banen, if we interpret election and representation as connected necessarily by parties of parties, you cannot do without. Either parties are populist or not, doesn't matter. It is a form of intermediation, although populists don't like to present themselves as intermediation, but as the unity of the country, of the people themselves. So it's not that you add something or you take away something. You have parties, although they are different in kind, but they do the same work. So I think that Schatzschneider is great American political scientist of the 60s, the 50s, understood it very well. You cannot have democracy without parties. Makes no sense. You cannot do it. You cannot create it unless you don't do direct democracy. In direct democracy, there were factions, we know, the Etherias in ancient Athens, but you don't have parties. You can do that, but not in electoral representative democracy. This is my answer to you. The third question was the new left. Who the new left? I really don't know.
Maybe
I cannot answer this question. First, I think not only Chantal Mouffe, there is an agreement between many people who analyze, both with competence of political scientists, I'm not, or the competence of political theorists, I am. They analyze, they see the process, why this happened now, right? After the Cold War, the collapse of ideologies, and that's also an important ideology, meaning the sense that democracy is not simply a political system, but is also a social condition for that political system to work. That is, think about T.H. Marshall, think about the social democratic ambition of creating the citizenry starting from the social, think about the factory democracy, democracy inside of the industry in which the workers want to participate by electing their representatives, creating a democracy inside of the working place. So we had many exemplification of this. Today, no longer, nothing is there now. And one reason why populists are so successful is because they do the job that previously was done by these politicals or ideas. So what to do it? Then what to do it? If we think that this is a problem, I think this is a problem, perhaps those who want to do something in order to prevent the democracy become simply a hammer, kind of majority hammering the system without nothing else. So perhaps I don't know whether it's a new left or the same left, I don't know, but simply a social democratic proposal needs to be conceived. And to do so, many other things are needed. An ideological transformation. We cannot simply accept the idea that there is nothing to say about economic, that the economic is outside of the political analysis because it's a kind of natural entity that we have to accept as it is. We have to change this view perhaps concerning, so Piketty proposed us to do that. That is to change the view in which we interpret economics, to change the view in which we interpret equality or inequality, which is not simply disgrace, it's not simply the outcome of our incapability, it's not a question of merit, it's a question of structural organization of wealth or poverty. So we need to enter in these discourses instead of being simply at the level of institutions and procedures. If you ask me what to do it, I don't know. But I think that this is an important problem that democracies need to tackle with.
Thank you very much. Susanna Garibai, who works on an anti-colonial role and function, an idea of nation in Latin America.
Hi. Thank you, Professor Urbinati, for your presentation. So I'm interested in the relationship between the anti-establishment critique or criticism and anti-oligarchy criticism, right? Because so you mentioned that there's some marketization of elections and candidacies, right? And I agree with this. And that in a way, this marketization empties out of ideology, both left and right political parties, right? But to me, it seems like actually the right does have an ideology, right? Ethno-nationalist, racial supremacy that then ends up being almost like class supremacy, right? So I don't know, sometimes I understand these processes that we are living now as oligarchization of representative democracy, right? So I'm just wondering, what is the relationship or how the populist perspective distinguishes between an anti-establishment criticism and anti-oligarchic criticism.
Yeah. So this is the question, the question in representative democracy, because as you know, there are different interpretations of representative democracy. One of them, Bernard Manin, for instance, telling us that elections are a Janus phase, one phase democratic, the other phase oligarchic. Oligarchic in the sense that the few are those who have been selected by the electors as representatives of some claims or because they are particularly good and so on and so forth. Of course, it's not the oligarchy of which Aristotle was talking about, but is a form of distinction. So if you assume this view, of course, democracy is like a good wine with a lot of water inside. It's a watering it loses its own taste, right? So democracy is liquid, is in connections with and thus contaminated by oligarchy. Fine, but we have to be more careful in this case, not because elections don't do so, but because we have to make to agree on what we mean by oligarchy. If by oligarchy we mean in the Aristotelian side, that is, there is a part of society that is already there, superior one in terms of economic recognition and so on and so forth. And this part wants to have a same politics, and those they have since they have a lot of potentials, a lot of money, think about money in private money in electoral campaign, they can buy their own positions, or they can support those who can support them somehow. So this kind of link between social wealth to political representation, this is a problem we have today. How it was possible to neutralize this problem? How is possible to neutralize this problem? Until now, it was possible because the many organize themselves in unions, in civil associations, in parties. And so they use the strength of number, the strength of quantity, so-called, to use Aristotle, to contain the strength of wealth and the strength of the few. If you take away the many and their powers of organizations, well, you have exactly what you had at the beginning when the process starts in the 18th century. The few, the well-being, the most affluent, they are also those who play the games, all games. This is the hierarchization of democracy, of representative democracy. We are in front of, and what is the reaction against that? Today, the reaction against that doesn't come from those in the name of the social function of democracy, no? They claim that everybody should have not only a say, but to have the means to have a say. So public financial of campaign, institutions capable of support them. So democracy is expensive. It's not simply good as it is. It's expensive. And if you don't have the means to finance your newspaper, to finance your party, you need to have, like in Germany, like in many countries, you need to have the states giving money to parties so as to avoid that private monies enter into politics. So this is an important issue, needs to be dealt with, cannot be simply mentioned. Something needs to be done. And thus, if you want to say so, if you want to do so, you recognize that the representation doesn't come spontaneously from election. It needs to be constructed, protected, monitored, and continuously shaped and supported. So it doesn't come by itself, you know, and thus, yes, the hierarchization of representative government is here. What the populists do, the populists see that, like you and me, we see it. They see it, and they answer in a way that is perhaps a shortcut. So they want to claim the unity of the people against them. The argument is not bad, because they claim that the large majority should have his say back, but the shortcuts, like many shortcuts, is not what at the end you end up with. This is a good intention, but the means are perhaps the wrong, not the functional one, because in doing so, you in fact, as Michels used to say, you reproduce a new oligarchy, you create a new leadership, you substitute the old one with a new one. You may say, okay, but this new one comes from us, the people. Yes, but once they are inside of the system, they become a new elite. And thus, I think that the populist does, although good at criticism, doesn't have good means to tackle with it. It's not embodiment, the solution.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, it's not embodiment solution if we want and we assume representative democracy based on the constitution that is according to what what Lefort used to say, the empty space of politics. Nobody should be there owning an institution, owning the parliament, owning. If we assume that constitutional democracy is this kind of open space for everybody, because nobody owns it, no majority owns it, no leader owns it, well, we need to take you know, to have a maintenance, a permanent maintenance of it. And the oligarchization is one of the important objects of maintenance.
I think you're on mute, später.
Katarina is studying in Ireland, and she is trying to think about university as a space in which democracy perhaps could be both developed and further developed and protected. So here you are, Katharina.
Thank you so much. That's great. Also, thank you so much, Professor Urbinati, for your talk. So I have a lot of questions, and I have some of the notes written down. I won't probably get to answer or to ask all the questions. You can also, pick a few points you would like to address. But I'm very interested, in kind of ways of listening and practicing, kind of like listening to people's needs and how to represent, maybe voices that aren't represented in the kind of system that we have right now, and also thinking especially about education and academia, university, in terms of politics and in terms of maybe a space of opening up. And so I think you really speak from into a really shared sentiment that I see kind of coming through in a lot of scholarship that's emerging, and also a lot of talks that we had as part of the conservatorium, which is kind of the need to reimagine politics. But without throwing out the baby with the bathwater, that's the thing in English, which means that you kind of demonize everything in all the institutions that we have right now. But you try to think about ways, how to exercise our, political voice and support voices in the process, and through various roles that we have, and also the means of representation of these voices. So that also change, the way we can represent ourselves in our kind of like changing society as well, right? Like the globalized society and so on. And I also had a look at your book, Me the People, 2019, I think. You launched it last year, I think, in your talk at the New School. And it was really inspiring because the book is a very hopeful book to me. And it kind of like expresses this hope and gives good evidence or good arguments for the hope in populism as well. You write about, your book about how populism can transform democracy and society. So one of the other themes that kind of seems to come out as part of this conservatorium or this global dialogue series is, thinking about building bridges and being a mediator. And I'm kind of like thinking in my own research about how academics and the educators can, kind of see themselves and understand themselves as, mediators. So, and I also see or I understand writing and also talking as a process of kind of mediation. And you very clearly in your book and also in your talk through kind of trying to bring together populism and democracy. I see that as a clear act of mediation, which is, I think, something that's really important because there is so much polarization in our society, right? And a lot of distrust and unexpressed sentiments and so on. So you're bringing concepts and ideas together, and you're asking questions about, also in your book, how can we organize a public and through kind of implementing or rethinking concrete processes to exercise democracy, including public voices and exercising politics that recognizes though this historically kind of produced splits. You write, you recognize the split in your book, understanding the nature of populism as peaceful and it's unifying people, right? It's creating solidarity, how I understand what you're saying. And then you say there is a spirit of populism, which is understood or has been understood historically as kind of anti-establishment, as this kind of like us versus them, kind of way of exercising power, the power of the people. So you also in your book write about, and you spoke today also about this kind of gap that is still there, and that we can recognize and in which we can kind of exercise democracy or reimagine these processes to organize society. And it reminded me, I'm coming from anthropology, so like one figure that really inspired me was Erickson, Thomas Erickson, who wrote about kind of the Anansi position as a role that anthropologists, but also researchers and academics, and probably everyone too, if we think about ourselves in that way, can take, having one foot in the system and one foot kind of like outside of the system and being mediators in that way. And he finds one way of exercising that in kind of the trend towards and the emphasis on engaged research, right? Conducting research with the public, engaging the public in knowledge production, and in finding solutions that can actually translate into policy. So there is this potential for academia that he recognizes, and that I also, recognize in hearing you speak, in kind of conducting research in politics to take this active role as a mediator in society. So my question then is, when you speak about populism, you're kind of quite clear that people need to be, in a way, or it's still kind of an understanding that people need to be represented by a leader who kind of understands the plurality of voices of people, but still manages to somehow find, you know, or maybe not embodying is the right word, but mediate their plurality of voices as kind of a voice of the people or as a group of people. So I wonder, okay, I have loads of questions, but I'm going to ask this question because I know we're running out of time. And there's
You
also
you will only give her 5 minutes to answer, Katerina. And it's
okay. So my question
ahead.
is, what is the role in your understanding of kind of leading researchers or leading academics in that kind of process?
Okay, so meanwhile, while we were talking, I sent you the title of a book. It's a 2007. So there, perhaps in this style, there are other books by Dara Strolovic. She is a sociologist, and she has, for the first time, she saw very strongly, in my view, empirically, the relationship between voice, or if you want to say, position of minorities and voice, how your position as in society as a peripheral can have an impact in your voice, even if by rights we have the same possibility or the same rights. De facto, we need much more if we are in a position of peripheral power. We need much more than simply a right. What we need you mentioned universities, education, culture, but not to be given, but simply to transform the teacher into an actor, into a protagonist of helping to give voice and give voice to the people who, so by creating a mentality, by creating a critical view of their own position or their people's condition. So the argument was made at the beginning of the century by John Dewey, and the tradition of pragmatism in America is the most important one in this way, because they connect in a holistic way society and the system and the political system, and they give socialization and culture a very intertwined interpretation. So by acting in action along with others, that is in society, I learn. So thinking in the making, they used to say. So I learn how to think about the system, myself, my problems, within this relationship with others. So if these relations are relations of hierarchy, subordination, subjugation, then you think in a way that reflects his own position acritically, as if you were naturally positioned in that way. So for this reason, the relations and culture are so connected, so importantly connected together. In order to say that when we speak about public opinion or formation of opinion, or the Habermasian public sphere of opinion formation, we are not talking simply about media, newspapers, televisions, and the web. We are talking about us in the university, in the school, in the way in which we interact with others, because in our relation with others, we carry with ourselves these views, the views of what we are and what the people should be or the community should be. So this reconnecting the people through culture, through opinion about work, professions, is very important. Now our society is very balkanized. Those who are professional, they live in one dimension. Those who are not, they live in another dimension. Even cities, as we know, are separated. You know, there are gated cities or for those who are affluent few, and there are slums for those who are the many and abandoned to themselves. This separation is a way of helping the oligarchization that Susanna was talking about, helping because you create the condition for different layers of political participation, which is what democracy doesn't want. So yes, I think that there is this important connection to be made again, because there was this project already.